Hey guys, tonight we're going back to a rain-slick London street, sometime around the 1860s, where the cobblestones are shiny with drizzle, chimney smoke swirls through the fog, and every passerby is bristling with, yes, umbrellas. Everywhere you turn, it's a sea of canopies, handles, and slightly passive-aggressive tapping. This is not just about staying dry. This is a battle of posture, etiquette, and deeply coded social maneuvering. And you probably won't survive it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know your location and local time in the comments, because I love seeing where everyone's tuning in from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It begins with you. Standing at the edge of Piccadilly, the rain has just started. Light enough that it whispers, but persistent. You reach for your umbrella, which is naturally black, tightly furled, with a polished wooden handle, and just the faintest creak in its hinge. You've polished it with care this morning, because in Victorian England, an umbrella wasn't just a tool, it was your reputation on a stick. As you open it, carefully with a smooth, well-practiced flick, you're already navigating a complex social ritual. First rule, don't make sudden movements. Sudden umbrella action was considered vaguely uncouth, like shouting in a library or gesturing too wildly at a tea party. Second rule, never open your umbrella too close to someone else's face. This sounds obvious until you realize the foot traffic on a busy London street was more tightly packed than a modern subway at rush hour. Your first near collision comes fast. A man with a shaggy mustache and a hat too large for his head swings his brolly open with abandon. You dodge instinctively, your umbrella tilting like a duelist's blade. He nods, barely, and moves on. No words. Just that faint flicker of mutual umbrella awareness. A social near miss. Umbrellas in the Victorian era were symbols of decorum and danger. Before they became common accessories, they were viewed with suspicion. Some critics worried that umbrella users were defying God's will by staying dry. Others simply thought they were French and therefore questionable. But by mid-century, the umbrella had become indispensable, particularly in grimy, coal-stained London, where soot and rain combined into what one newspaper called chimney soup. And yet, while the item became more practical, the etiquette surrounding it only got trickier. Take your pace, for example. Walking briskly under an umbrella was permissible if you were of a certain class, but not too briskly. A nobleman charging down the street with umbrella tilted aggressively forward might be accused of umbrella bullying, a real term used by cartoonists of the era. Historians still argue whether this phrase was invented satirically or if Londoners really saw umbrella positioning as a moral failing. You turn a corner and find yourself in a bottleneck of brollies, all shapes and sizes. Long-handled men's models with brass tips, ladies' parasol umbrella hybrids trimmed in absurd amounts of lace. A child nearby opens a comically small one, patterned with ducks, and is promptly scolded by his nursemaid. Children were not supposed to brandish umbrellas until they had mastered napkin folding etiquette. Your own umbrella, thankfully, is textbook perfect, but not everyone is so careful. An elderly gentleman walking toward you jabs his tip slightly downward, an aggressive move that Victorian etiquette manuals would later call the social wedge. It meant, I'm not moving, and you probably should. You yield slightly to avoid eye contact and injury. But as you do, a muddy puddle makes a surprising entrance. You try to sidestep. Too late. Splash. Just enough to catch your hem. There were entire columns in 19th century ladies' magazines dedicated to dealing with wet hems. Airing them by the fire was acceptable, but only if done modestly and without showing one's ankles. One etiquette expert even recommended carrying a petticoat cloth for such emergencies. Another, less helpfully, advised simply not walking during rain at all. A cart rattles past, spraying another arc of water. You adjust your umbrella slightly, tipping it just enough to protect your face without appearing vain. It's a delicate balance. A low tilt meant privacy, but polite. Too high, and it could be read as arrogance. Too low, and you risked being labeled suspicious, perhaps even hiding from a creditor. The umbrella etiquette extended far beyond the street. A dropped umbrella in a gentleman's club might signal you were too flustered for decent company. At balls, umbrellas were never to be brought into the main room, lest someone's frock get poked or worse, smudged. And in more rural settings, bringing out an umbrella too soon was considered overly cautious, if not cowardly. You begin to notice the way others carry theirs. Some grip it like a walking stick, upright and stiff. Others drape theirs over a shoulder, relaxed but slightly theatrical. One man twirls his absent-mindedly, prompting a look of horror from a nearby nanny. Spinning an umbrella was the Victorian equivalent of chewing gum with your mouth open. Distracting, juvenile, and liable to poke an eye out. And then there's the flirtation. Oh yes, umbrellas weren't just protective shields. They were flirty little flags. A woman might lower hers just a touch while glancing sideways. A man might offer his to someone in a light drizzle and thereby signal interest and gallantry in one gesture. But beware. Offering an umbrella too quickly could read as forward. There were even cases of men bringing spare umbrellas just to offer them casually in public. Victorians did not mess around. You pause beneath a gas lamp and shake off a bit of water. It's only been 10 minutes, and already your arms are sore from micro-adjustments. But you're surviving so far. You continue along the pavement, your steps slowed by the delicate choreography of dodging umbrellas, horse droppings, and the occasional aggressively waddling goose. Because for some reason, someone in your neighborhood has decided that urban geese are a good idea. But the real obstacle course is above shoulder height, where umbrella spines slice the air like slow-motion sabers. This is where the unspoken art of umbrella fencing begins. You're approaching a narrow stretch of sidewalk where only one umbrella can pass comfortably at a time. A woman in a pale blue pelisse approaches, her parasol-umbrella hybrid held at a fixed, slightly elevated angle. Her eyes flick to yours, brief, cool, and entirely Victorian. There is a moment of silent negotiation. You slow half a step. She does not. Your umbrella dips. Hers glides past, completely unruffled. Congratulations. You just avoided a social skirmish, because umbrella etiquette in the Victorian age was often compared to fencing. Not the Olympic kind, but the social ballet of approach, avoidance, and the occasional symbolic jab. Satirical papers of the time loved to caricature city pedestrians as duelists, mid-parry, with umbrellas drawn like rapiers. One cartoon even depicted an umbrella standoff so tense that a policeman had to intervene, armed only with a coat. Modern readers might assume this is all exaggeration, but historians still argue whether certain umbrella duels, yes, literal duels, ever really happen. One oft-repeated story describes a gentleman who, after having his silk umbrella poked by a clumsy stranger, challenged the man to a duel at dawn. Pistols, of course, not umbrellas. Although, frankly, the latter might have been safer. The fencing metaphor wasn't just poetic. Instructional guides of the time advised young men and women on the proper stances and angles for safe and socially acceptable umbrella use. One manual recommended keeping the umbrella tilted at a 45-degree angle to the chest, with the handle gripped loosely but firmly, like a courtship hand, not a meat cleaver. Yes, that was the actual wording. You're not sure whether to blush or laugh. You continue weaving through the crowd, noticing now how each person's umbrella behavior reveals something. The timid ones walk close to the wall, their brollies bobbing like nervous antennae. The confident, often older men with serious eyebrows, march straight down the middle, daring others to flinch first. Occasionally you spot a mischief maker, a young boy twirling his umbrella like a baton, drawing scowls from every direction. And just ahead, a disaster in progress. Two gentlemen approach each other from opposite directions, both tall, both carrying identical black umbrellas with curved silver handles. Neither slows, neither tilts. They are on a collision course that can only end in awkwardness. At the last moment, one breaks formation. His umbrella dips, the other passes, victorious without a glance. The loser grimaces and mutters something that sounds suspiciously like baronet-born snob. And just like that, the silent umbrella hierarchy asserts itself again. You try not to laugh, well, not audibly, but it's becoming clear that this isn't just about staying dry. It's about status. Who yields to whom? Who lifts? Who lowers? who steps off the curb into the muddy gutter, and who strides cleanly through. And of course, who gets splashed. As you pass an alley, a coach rumbles past, its wheels slicing through a puddle with vicious precision. You narrowly avoid a full-body dousing thanks to a well-timed umbrella pivot. The woman behind you is not so lucky. You hear the splat, the soft shriek, and the wet squish of damp taffeta. Now here's the thing. Umbrella use was not only class-dependent, but gendered in the most exquisitely Victorian ways. Men's umbrellas were expected to be large, dark, and utilitarian, extensions of one's spine. Wielded correctly, they made a man look tall, decisive, and not to be trifled with. A sagging canopy or frayed tip, by contrast, was a walking declaration of social decline. There were even advertisements promising umbrellas, guaranteed not to invert in gusts lest your dignity suffer. Women's umbrellas or parasols were another story entirely. These were ornate, colorful, and often designed to not be used in rain. Instead, they shielded delicate complexions from sun and judgmental glances. A parasol wasn't just for shade, it was for show. And yet, as practical rain umbrellas became more widespread among women, the tension between fashion and function hit its soggy peak. Some women tried to compromise, using parasols lined with waxed fabric or carrying two separate implements entirely. Others simply refused to walk in the rain, sending maids ahead to test the weather. A few trailblazing ladies, though, insisted on managing their own umbrellas, even practicing their twirl and close technique so as not to appear clumsy in public. You think back to a story you heard, possibly apocryphal, possibly true, about a duchess who refused to carry her own umbrella, insisting instead that a footman follow 3 paces behind her, holding it aloft like a mobile parasol shrine. Historians still argue whether this was an actual duchess or a fictional stand-in for the extravagance of the era. As you pass a row of shop windows, your reflection reveals your own form. Umbrella just slightly askew, maybe a touch too low. You adjust it quickly. Better. Just ahead, a street preacher is shouting something unintelligible about sin, chimney smoke, and the moral perils of leaky roofs. His umbrella, ironically, is missing a spoke and flaps like a dying bat in the wind. You take that as a sign to turn the corner. And as you do, you realize something odd. You're starting to enjoy this. Not just the dryness, but the delicate social dance of it all. The mini-drama of each umbrella interaction. The soft clack of ferrules on cobblestone. The wafting scent of rain, soot, and distant biscuits. It's a rainy day in Victorian London. You're surviving the etiquette. You've dodged social slights, navigated near duels, and only stepped in one questionable puddle. So far. But be warned, the next intersection is near a theater, and theater crowds are the wild cards of umbrella etiquette. You approach the intersection with mild dread. The theater crowd looms ahead like a cluster of restless ravens, flapping, twirling, and, worst of all, laughing. A dangerous sound in any period, but particularly risky when paired with wide-brimmed hats and zero spatial awareness. Tonight's performance must have just ended. The sidewalk is a mosaic of trailing gowns, polished shoes, and umbrellas being deployed with all the grace of startled squid. You instinctively raise yours just slightly, an aerial shield, and push gently into the swirl. Theater-goers, you've come to learn, are umbrella anarchists. Here, social order phrase. A young man with a hat too large for his head holds his umbrella perpendicular to the ground, creating what could generously be called a portable guillotine. A woman laughs as her companion tries to open an umbrella while still half in his carriage, the handle clacking into the doorframe with each attempt. Behind you, someone spins theirs idly, catching your coat sleeve with a flick that feels deliberate. You resist the urge to retaliate. That way, madness and ruined silk lies. One particularly ill-behaved gentleman jabs his umbrella in a diagonal arc to emphasize a story he's telling. His companion ducks expertly. You do not. You wince as the tip grazes your shoulder and consider the possibility that umbrellas should require a license. But amidst the chaos, something else catches your attention. An usher holding a sign that reads, "Gentlemen, umbrellas must be checked." Ah, yes, the curious ritual of umbrella checks. Most theaters in the Victorian era insisted that guests surrender their umbrellas upon entry, treating them like potential weapons or at least unwanted distractions. This policy had nothing to do with moisture and everything to do with etiquette. The rustle of wet canvas, the drip-drip onto velvet cushions, the occasional gust-induced pop, all unacceptable during a quiet monologue. Historians still argue whether this tradition began due to a particularly rowdy opera night in 1843, when half the audience opened umbrellas during a scene set in the rain for added realism. But umbrella checks weren't universal. At certain venues, the opposite occurred. Patrons were expected to bring their umbrellas and display them proudly, especially if they were adorned with silver caps or monograms. A well-designed umbrella could say as much about your wealth and taste as your opera glasses or mustache wax. You watch a well-dressed couple arguing over whether to check theirs. The man insists it's common sense. The woman counters that hers is a gamp, a nickname for the large, outdated umbrella famously associated with Mrs. Gamp from Dickens' Martin Chuzzlewit. Gamps were clumsy, loud, and often maligned as symbols of spinsterhood or social decline. She insists hers is ironic. He doesn't laugh. In moments like this, you begin to understand why umbrella etiquette was so loaded. Outside the theater, street urchins and enterprising lads offer umbrella valet services. For a penny, they'll hold your umbrella, spin it dry, or even escort you from carriage to door under its shelter. Some offer shoulder massages and fresh peppermints too, though you're not convinced those are part of the official umbrella package. One particularly charming urchin calls out, "Oi, yours looks heavy, sir. 5 minutes off your life just carrying it." You decline with a smirk, but file that line away. It's a good one. You finally push through the fringe of the crowd and escape onto a quieter stretch of road. Here, things are calmer. Umbrellas held steady, conversations hushed. You spot a man balancing his closed umbrella over one shoulder, like a sword at rest. A child walks beside him, mimicking the pose with a stick. The boys' version is more pirate than gentleman, but the spirit is there. Further down, a shop window displays the newest models. Folding umbrellas, waterproof canopies, ivory handles shaped like greyhounds and peacocks. One boasts a hidden flask inside the shaft, a feature definitely not mentioned in etiquette guides, but possibly more useful than any lace trim. Historians still debate whether these novelty models were ever truly practical or simply sold as jokes to bachelor uncles and eccentric professors. You pause at the window, admiring a particularly sleek specimen with a carved lion's head at the grip. According to the tag, it's suitable for both rainstorms and subtle displays of dominance. Well, that covers both British seasons. Your reflection joins you in the glass. You look almost competent. Slightly windswept, yes, but your umbrella has survived intact and no visible puddle-related injuries. Your etiquette, however accidental, has held. But of course, Victorian umbrella behavior wasn't limited to the outdoors. It followed people indoors, into drawing rooms, shops, even church pews. And that, you recall with growing dread, is where things get really awkward. Because the indoor umbrella faux pas, that's a scandal waiting to unfold. Just ahead, a friend of yours stands at the entrance to a small bookshop, waving you in. She wears a bonnet and holds an umbrella closed but still dripping, tipped down. You step closer and the shopkeeper winces. Because yes, that puddle on the entry mat just became your fault. You see, in Victorian times, where you placed your umbrella was nearly as important as how you carried it. A dry umbrella could rest in a corner. A damp one required immediate attention. Draining racks, porcelain stands, or in the case of aristocratic homes, personal footmen who would remove and dry it out of sight. Leaving it open indoors? Taboo. Setting it tip up in a pew? Scandalous. Propping it near a fireplace to dry faster? Practically an arson attempt. Some etiquette manuals warned against carrying your umbrella into a hostess's parlor at all. Better to arrive wet, one guide scolded, than to risk offending the drapes. You begin to suspect that Victorians were less worried about rain and more about upholstery. So you do what any well-mannered soul would. You take your umbrella, close it tightly, tap the tip gently on the doorframe to remove excess water, without splatter, and place it discreetly in the porcelain stand beside the fireplace. The shopkeeper nods once, grudging approval. And that's when you notice a placard mounted on the wall behind her. It reads, "Well-bred umbrellas do not drip without apology." Well then, as you browse the dusty shelves, your thoughts drift. Back to the theater chaos, the umbrella jousts in the street, in the oddly militarized choreography of it all. You marvel that a simple tool, just cloth and ribs and a stick, could become a weapon of etiquette warfare. And yet the next time you open yours, you'll think twice about the angle, the tilt, the subtle nod that says, "Yes, I see you, and I will not jab you in the chin today." Because out here, umbrellas don't just shield you from the rain. They test your manners, your reflexes, and, let's be honest, your core strength. You're halfway across the square now, the drizzle tapering to a fine mist that catches the gaslights like a soft fog of polished brass. Your umbrella, still damp but well-behaved, rests neatly at your side. You're no longer fighting the crowd, but your vigilance doesn't falter. After all, you've just entered the most treacherous part of Victorian umbrella usage: sidewalk diplomacy. Let's be honest, Victorian sidewalks weren't exactly roomy, narrow, uneven, often cluttered with lampposts, sandwich board advertisements, stray dogs, and enthusiastic street corner preachers. Add umbrellas into the mix, and the result? A daily ballet of dodges, dips, and silent social calculations. You pass a gentleman whose umbrella is tilted ever so slightly to the left. That's your cue. Shift yours to the right. It's like semaphore, except more passive-aggressive. A lady approaches, holding hers low and steady, the handle looped over her wrist. You instinctively raise yours higher. This is less about chivalry and more about orbital mechanics. One false move, and you'll both be poked in the eyebrow. The etiquette here is murky. Historians still debate whether umbrella passing protocol was ever formally standardized. Some etiquette manuals recommended keeping to the left and tipping slightly to avoid eye contact. Others insisted the right side was the gentleman's lane. The real answer? You make it up as you go, while pretending you're supremely confident. A carriage thunders past, spraying water from a deep rut in the road. Without thinking, you flick your umbrella up just in time, an elegant, if slightly dramatic, parry. You probably won't get a medal for it, but you might have just saved your waistcoat. Nearby, a constable raises an eyebrow in approval, or judgment, or indigestion. It's hard to say with Victorian facial expressions. Of course, not everyone is so skilled. You spot two men colliding umbrellas at full tilt. Thwack! The sound surprisingly musical. They both pause, attempt identical bows, and then proceed to walk around each other in a confused spiral that lasts nearly 20 seconds. A nearby newspaper vendor offers sarcastic applause. You'd be surprised how much social standing could hinge on such moments. In fact, one famous anecdote tells of a minor baronet in Kensington who was socially blacklisted for 6 months after failing to raise his umbrella for a bishop on a rainy Tuesday. The bishop, being both wet and vengeful, made sure everyone at the gentlemen's club knew it. Was it petty? Absolutely. Was it effective? Incredibly. You quietly wonder if Victorian bishops kept lists. But it wasn't just about raising or lowering. There were subtleties: the single-hand tilt, the spin and lift for doorways, the discreet over-the-shoulder rest while conversing. A skilled umbrella user could signal deference, defiance, or even flirtation, all without saying a word. Take, for example, the parasol twirl. Though technically more associated with women's sunshades, the gesture crept into umbrella culture as well. A slow, thoughtful twirl while waiting at a crossing could signal boredom, disinterest, or just that you'd seen a matinee and were still pretending to be dramatic. One particularly risque gesture, now lost to most etiquette books, involved tapping the ground 3 times with the umbrella's tip. Depending on the rhythm, it could mean, "I admire your boots," or "Shall we meet at the tea shop at 4?" Or possibly, "There's a rat behind you." Historians still argue whether these meanings were ever consistent. A woman walking briskly behind you clears her throat. You shuffle sideways to let her pass. She offers a quick nod and expertly lifts her umbrella just an inch to avoid your shoulder. It's a quiet, flawless exchange. You both feel like you've passed some unspoken test. Further down the street, a street musician fiddles out a cheerful tune. His companion, likely a brother or cousin, flips an umbrella upside down to collect coins. A clever trick, Though not strictly fashionable, you drop a halfpenny in anyway and catch a wink. And then at last you reach the bridge. Crossing the Thames in drizzle is a moody cinematic affair. The sky presses low and the river murmurs beneath your boots like a bored oracle. Other figures cross with you, men in bowlers, children skipping, one woman in an enormous bonnet that may or may not have its own weather system. You angle your umbrella to account for the rising wind. It hums faintly with the pressure, a quiet little tune of its own. One wrong angle, and this could become a very short flight lesson. But you've trained for this. You adjust your grip, take a step forward, and lean slightly into the breeze. Suddenly, a gust catches another man's umbrella and flips it inside out. The classic Victorian calamity. The umbrella flaps like a startled moth. The man curses, softly of course, and fights to close it. He glances around, mortified. Everyone pretends not to notice, which is the polite thing to do. No one wants to witness an umbrella death. You pass him with a sympathetic smile. You've been there. We've all been there. The truth is, Victorian umbrellas weren't exactly built for high performance. Many were made of wood, bone, or whalebone ribs. Sturdy, yes, but liable to snap if mistreated. And the canopies, often oilskin or silk, beautiful but unforgiving. You had to know your umbrella's personality, its flex points, its weaknesses, its particular complaint in high winds. Some even squeaked when opened. Others had a lopsided bias, always pulling slightly to one side like a tipsy dance partner. But there were innovations. In the late 1800s, Samuel Fox invented the steel-ribbed Paragon frame, promising durability and better wind resistance. A marvel of engineering, unless you were already attached to your bamboo-handled heirloom and refused to change on principle. Historians still argue whether Fox's invention truly revolutionized umbrella design or if it was simply the most advertised. Either way, it started a quiet arms race among gentlemen whose umbrella had the best materials, the most silent opening, the sleekest silhouette. You take one last look at your own. A bit frayed at the edges, sure. Handles slightly chipped from an unfortunate stair slip last Tuesday. But it's yours. It survived 2 crushes, a misplaced marmalade jar, and that disastrous attempt to use it as a walking stick during a countryside ramble. You give it a fond little spin, just once, just enough, and step off the bridge into the heart of town. The cobbles of the high street clack beneath your boots, your umbrella now resting confidently against your shoulder, as if it too has developed a sense of self-importance. It should. You've just survived the umbrella bridge gauntlet and entered the most decorum-demanding part of your day, visiting hours. That's right. This is the portion of your afternoon where you're expected to drop in on at least one aunt, 2 acquaintances, and a vicar's wife whose name you never quite caught, all while pretending you're not slowly developing trench foot from your damp socks. And of course, your umbrella must remain a perfectly disciplined companion throughout. Victorian calling etiquette was already a labyrinth of time slots, calling cards, parlor codes, and strange rules about how many biscuits to accept without seeming greedy. But add an umbrella into the mix? Now it's performance art. First things first. You never, never enter someone's home with your umbrella open, even if it's raining. That's not just gauche. It's practically a declaration of war. It implies distrust of your host's eaves or roofing tiles. The superstition about opening an umbrella indoors was only half about luck and mostly about mud. So you pause at the threshold of the elegant townhouse. The butler eyes your umbrella as if it might leap up and smudge the wallpaper. You shake it, gently, 3 precise times, toward the nearest boot scraper. This is not the time for enthusiastic flapping. An overly vigorous umbrella shake once resulted in a marquis's prized taxidermy owl getting soaked. It never fluffed right again. Inside, the umbrella's social role shifts again. It becomes a sort of quiet sentinel, either parked in the umbrella stand, if it's a tasteful establishment, or leaned gracefully against the doorframe, its curve elegant, its presence respectful. It is not to be handled, fiddled with, or, heaven forbid, used to point at things during conversation. That's how you get labeled eccentric in the Times. But what if you're calling on someone a bit more casual? Say a widowed cousin with strong opinions on marmalade and 5 cats named after prime ministers. Then your umbrella takes on a slightly different air. It becomes a conversational prop, something to hold lightly as you decline yet another overly buttered scone. In such households, umbrellas were sometimes rested tipped down on the parlor floor and used as leg rests. Queen Victoria herself once scolded a guest for propping his feet on one. But perhaps that's apocryphal. Historians still argue whether it was an umbrella or a ceremonial pike. Anyway, your hostess today is a Mrs. Fortescue Minton, twice hyphenated, three times widowed, and reportedly partial to a brandy and tea blend that leaves most visitors quietly hallucinating after the second cup. You take a seat and your umbrella leans obediently at your side, a picture of civility. A canary chirps. Somewhere, a grandfather clock sounds exactly 4 o'clock. Mrs. Fortescue Minton eyes your umbrella with a smile. "Is that whalebone?" She purrs. You nod, unsure whether that's still a compliment. She continues, "I had one just like it in Brussels. Lost it in the Great Umbrella Incident of '73, you don't dare ask." She launches into a story involving a parade, an overly excited pug, and something called a brass pineapple flourish. The details are dreamlike. You sip your tea, carefully balancing saucer, cup, and damp knees. There's a science to it, an entire lost discipline of teacup stability in wet trousers. You've mastered the lean forward just enough pose, umbrella tucked discreetly between your ankles. Eventually, it's time to go. Victorian social calls were a performance of punctuality. You stayed precisely 15 minutes or risked scandal. As you rise, you give a tiny bow and reclaim your umbrella like a knight retrieving their sword. Back on the street, the sky opens again. Not quite rain, but something suspiciously similar. You deploy your umbrella with a flick of the wrist, so smooth you imagine a few pigeons are applauding. And just as you settle back into your stride, disaster strikes. From the opposite direction, a cluster of schoolboys rush past, laughing, chasing one another, one of them clutching what appears to be a papier-mâché badger. As they barrel through the footpath, one of them clips your umbrella with a muddy boot. The horror. There is a moment, a terrible pause, when you look down and see the smear, a long streak of Thames Bank grime right across your silk canopy. You exhale slowly. The polite thing to do is nothing at all. Any reaction more than a sigh and a slow blink might be considered uncouth. Instead, you murmur, "Boys will be boys," and pretend the streak adds character. Later, you'll attempt to clean it with vinegar and a stiff brush. Some say cold water and lemon juice works best. Others swear by crushed lavender and a firm prayer. Historians still argue whether there was ever a truly reliable Victorian umbrella cleaning method, or whether they simply gave up and declared the stain a family heirloom. As you walk, you pass an umbrella repair shop, a curious little place with curved windows and a sign that reads, "Re-ribbing, spoke welding, and handle rethreading while you wait." Inside, a man in fingerless gloves is lovingly restoring a canopy with stitching so fine it might be surgical. You make a mental note. Perhaps your umbrella deserves a tune-up soon. Like a loyal dog or a good waistcoat, it deserves pampering. Further down the street, you spot a pair of nannies, their charges marching in a stiff formation behind them, each holding a child-sized umbrella with more enthusiasm than precision. One child twirls his like a sword. Another has somehow turned his inside out and now wears it like a bonnet. You give them a gentle nod. These are the future. And just as you round the final corner toward home, the rain begins again in earnest. The kind that sounds like fingertips on tin. You draw your umbrella in close, let the sound surround you, and enjoy for just a moment the private cocoon it creates. The world outside blurs, but your footing is solid. The street glistens, gas lights glowing golden in the puddles. Somewhere a dog barks. Somewhere else, a piano tries to keep up with a thunderclap. But beneath your umbrella, everything is calm, proper, utterly, delightfully dry. You ease the front door shut behind you with that satisfying click that marks your escape from the rain. And, let's be honest, from human interaction. Your umbrella is not tossed on a mat or abandoned like a common hat. No, it is ceremoniously placed tip down into your foyer's dedicated umbrella stand. Brass, slightly tarnished, shaped like a Grecian urn. Every respectable Victorian household had one, And in some of the more fanatical households, the stand had labels. One for wet umbrellas, one for dry, one for parasols, and one inexplicably marked emergency. Scholars are still baffled as to what constituted an umbrella emergency beyond light drizzle and light scandal. This leads us neatly into what we might call the umbrella's private life, its backstage routines, the cleaning, the maintenance, the subtle art of making sure your umbrella doesn't rot or smell like old socks wrapped in kelp. Victorian umbrellas were often made of delicate materials, silk, gingham, alpaca fabric if you were fancy, or oilcloth if you were preparing for a typhoon. The ribs, whalebone, steel, even bamboo if you were a trendsetter. The handles were often horn, ivory, or intricately carved wood. These were not tools, these were heirlooms with opinions, and as such, they needed regular care. Rainwater could warp the shaft, salt air could rust the fittings, dust could creep in and whisper fungus into the folds. So you hang yours in the right spot, open just slightly, near the hearth, but not too near. Warmth helps it dry, but too much heat, and the silk might wrinkle like overcooked pudding skin. Every month or week, if you're devoted, you oil the mechanism with a dab of castor oil and polish the handle with beeswax. Some umbrella owners even scented their umbrellas. A discreet touch of lavender water or a tar of roses was said to lift the spirits during rainy commutes. One particularly posh earl reportedly had his umbrella handle infused with ambergris, which sounds romantic until you realize ambergris is whale vomit. Speaking of household rituals, if you lived with staff, the umbrella care was often delegated to the second footman. First footman had grander concerns like decanting port or polishing the silver sugar nippers. The second footman, however, got intimately familiar with the damp, the mildew, and the occasional snail that hitchhiked up the shaft. There was in some homes a special drying rack, something like a clothesline crossed with a harp, dedicated solely to umbrella care. In fact, there's a detailed household manual from 1872 that includes a floor plan for a parasol airing room. Historians still argue whether this was a common architectural feature or just one particularly umbrella-obsessed baronet's fever dream. But umbrella hygiene wasn't just about scent and stiffness, it was also about status. A clean, well-kept umbrella announced that you were a person of habits. A dirty one? That you perhaps lacked discipline, or worse, had walked through the East End. Of course, umbrella faux pas didn't end with cleanliness. There was also the terrifying possibility of theft. And here, my dear listener, begins a whole subculture of umbrella identification tactics. Victorians became surprisingly creative when it came to ensuring that their umbrella returned home. Some stitched their names into the seams in thread so fine it could only be seen under gaslight. Others engraved their initials into the handle. A few eccentric sorts added small whistles or bells that jingled faintly when carried, an early and deeply annoying form of anti-theft device. One rather famous umbrella theft incident occurred at the British Museum. A clergyman, having admired another man's elegant brolly during a particularly rainy afternoon, accidentally, picked it up and left. The victim placed an ad in the Times, describing the umbrella in poetic terms involving peacock silk and divine circumference. A duel was nearly proposed. Instead, a mutual apology was arranged over toasted crumpets. Umbrella swap mishaps were so common that one London club, the Society of Respectable Gents, introduced an official umbrella exchange ledger. Members were expected to log their umbrella's dimensions and distinguishing marks, just in case someone else left with theirs. If this sounds excessive, remember, these people also labeled their forks and named their colognes after Greek gods. Back in your own hall, you glance at your umbrella with a strange fondness. It has dried perfectly. No sagging, no musty aroma, no twisted spokes. You pick it up and admire the fine stitching on its seams. No fraying, just the gentle wear of an object used with respect. Perhaps tomorrow, you'll take it in for a retipping. Or maybe you'll finally order a new tassel for the end of the handle. Red velvet, subtle but confident. And what of umbrella storage in the off-season? Surely these objects weren't just tossed into closets come summer? Absolutely not. True Victorians observed a seasonal rotation. Winter umbrellas were dark, navy, brown, or black. Summer umbrellas, Pale ginghams, soft creams, even pastel stripes if you were daring. You gently wrap your winter brolly in muslin, tie it with string, and store it in the top of the wardrobe. Some owners even padded the tip with cork, lest it damage other garments in its slumber. Of course, accidents happened. There are stories of umbrellas unfurling in the middle of summer picnics, having somehow been triggered by sunlight, heat, or, as one lady claimed, a jealous wind. Historians remain divided on whether this was poetic exaggeration or just bad umbrella hinges. But you're no amateur. Yours folds and locks like a charm. You place it on the hall table, just for tonight, its presence comforting. Like a friend who never talks too much, never needs feeding, and always offers shelter in a storm. Later upstairs, you peek out your bedroom window and see another figure below, hurrying through the lamplight, umbrella bobbing above their head. There's something rhythmic about it, almost musical, and you wonder briefly how many stories your umbrella could tell. Of cobbled streets, whispered gossip, near misses with carriage wheels, and that one squirrel that briefly tried to live in it. But for now it's still, and so are you. You wake the next morning to the gentle patter of rain on the window. Again. Welcome to Victorian England, where precipitation is practically a cultural institution. You stretch, blink at the gray sky, and already your mind drifts to umbrella logistics. But today, let's consider not the object itself, but the remarkable way it guided your behavior in public. Yes, it's time we talked about umbrella street manners, a surprisingly intricate dance of deference, posture, and spatial awareness. You didn't just walk through the streets of London wielding your umbrella like a knight's lance. No, no. You adjusted. You adapted. You followed unspoken codes that even the London fog couldn't obscure. Imagine you're strolling down Oxford Street, pavement glistening, carts rattling by, and every other passerby armed with an umbrella. Your top priority? Avoiding a tip collision. And so begins the ballet of the umbrella tilt. When two pedestrians approach, both with umbrellas open, each is expected to tilt slightly to the opposite side, allowing a graceful pass without contact. Ladies tilt right, gentlemen typically left. Children were simply expected to dart and dodge like miniature chimney sweeps on a sugar high. This etiquette became so elaborate that, at one point, entire etiquette pamphlets were dedicated to rainy day deportment. One such gem, the polite parapluie, advised, should a gentleman encounter a lady on a narrow walk, he is to lower his umbrella, stepping aside so that her own may pass overhead like a canopy. Historians still debate whether this was chivalry or an elaborate excuse for mild neck strain. And what about umbrella heights? A taller person was expected to raise their umbrella to prevent poking a shorter passerby in the face. In extreme height mismatches, this sometimes led to a sort of bob and weave street choreography. Commuters would gently duck, weave, and sidestep as though engaged in a gentle, weather-themed fencing match. There's even a surviving cartoon from the Punch magazine archives showing two gentlemen attempting to pass each other in an alley so narrow their umbrella tips become locked like antlers. Below the illustration, the caption reads, "Sir, I shan't yield." "Nor I, good man." The next frame shows both men drenched, having stubbornly stood their ground while the rain gleefully soaked them through. Beyond tilting and lifting, one had to consider umbrella drip discipline. Victorians were incredibly wary of transferring street grime into shops, cafes, or, heaven forbid, drawing rooms. Thus, the proper procedure upon entering a building was to gently shake excess droplets onto the step before crossing the threshold. Hold the umbrella tipped down, always tipped down, with the canopy carefully furled. Never under any circumstances swing or flick it. This last rule was so important that one London shop actually posted a sign, "Umbrella flicking will not be tolerated. Offenders will be asked to leave and may be thwacked." In crowded streets, umbrella management reached its peak complexity. Picture a rainy afternoon outside the Crystal Palace. Everyone's jostling, and visibility's already low thanks to the fog and bonnets the size of parasailing kites. Umbrellas became mobile hazards. More than one lady's ostrich-feathered hat met a tragic end under the wire tip of a careless commuter's canopy. That's why umbrella shrinking was invented. No, this isn't an early science fiction trope. It simply meant partially collapsing your umbrella when threading through a crowd, reducing its width while maintaining a modest amount of coverage. This required practice and the reflexes of a raccoon on a tightrope. But done well, it allowed for smooth passage with only minor jostling and an acceptable number of wet elbows. There was also a surprisingly strict code around who raised an umbrella for whom. A gentleman, for example, was always expected to raise his umbrella for a lady, even a stranger, if she was caught in the rain without one. But if two women met and only one had an umbrella, that's where it got complicated. Etiquette guides advise that, if of equal station, they may share. If unequal, the superior rank offers or not at her leisure. So yes, your social rank could determine whether or not you got rained on. Naturally, some people attempted to game the system. There are several recorded instances of young men pretending to fumble and accidentally sharing their umbrella with a lady of higher class, presumably to spark conversation, or a whirlwind courtship. One such romance ended in a duel, not because of love lost, but because the gentleman dared to touch the lady's parasol handle. Big mistake, and in case you're wondering, yes, the umbrella had a right of way. In certain areas, such as theater entrances or covered promenades, those without umbrellas were expected to yield to those carrying them. The logic being, if you had the foresight to bring one, you had earned the privilege of unbothered passage. This created the occasional social standoff, especially if both parties had umbrellas. In those cases, rank decided everything. It was also considered extremely rude to open your umbrella indoors. Superstition aside, which many still held, it was a logistical nightmare. Victorian homes were packed with low-hanging chandeliers, carved moldings, and breakable knickknacks, just begging to be jabbed by a rogue spoke. In fact, opening an umbrella indoors could lead to anything from a snide remark to full-on social banishment, which is worse than it sounds when you've already committed to the opera season. And heaven help you if you owned a novelty umbrella. One countess was reportedly banned from the Royal Horticultural Society's spring garden party because her umbrella was shaped like a sunflower and emitted a faint perfume when opened. Officially, she was turned away due to disruptive fragrance. Unofficially, it was umbrella envy, plain and simple. So now, as you prepare for your own hypothetical rainy promenade, you review the mental checklist. Tilt right? Check. Raise for shorter pedestrians? Check. No dripping, swinging, or sudden opening? Absolutely. Social standing confirmed? As far as you know. And with that, you step out, your umbrella a precise angle of modest elevation, your gait perfectly timed to avoid clashing canopies. Because in the world of Victorian umbrella etiquette, it's not just about staying dry, it's about staying dignified. You've been walking the streets for hours now, umbrella held aloft like a polite flag of civilization, every tilt and step calculated, every potential puddle sidestepped with an almost military level of finesse. But let's pause for a moment to ask a question few dare voice in polite society. What happens when umbrella etiquette collides with public transportation? Ah yes, Victorian public transport, that peculiar liminal space where class distinctions meet practical discomfort and where your umbrella might suddenly become your most resented travel companion. Let's start with the omnibuses, those clunky horse-drawn rectangles on wheels that rattled across cobblestone streets like a carnival ride designed by someone who hated joints. Omnibuses were theoretically democratic, but in practice they were class-ridden social ecosystems, and nothing threw off the fragile order more than a wet umbrella at knee level. You climb aboard. It's raining, naturally. There's barely any space between passengers, most of whom are layered in coats, cloaks, and questionable choices in hat feathers. You're holding an umbrella that is somehow both soaking wet and impossibly large. Now what? If you're well-bred, you immediately furl it as tightly as possible, point it downward, and wedge it between your boots like a guilty secret. But what do you do with the drips? They're inevitable. There's a woman in green velvet glaring at you. She knows. Everyone knows. Your umbrella is forming a small lake beneath your seat. Historians still argue whether umbrella etiquette on omnibuses was ever truly standardized. Some claim there was a quiet code. Keep it low, don't let it touch your neighbor, and under no circumstances let it bloom open. Others believed that by 1870, the etiquette had become so muddled that some passengers simply chose to get wet rather than navigate the social labyrinth of umbrella folding while seated. There are tales, possibly apocryphal, of an elderly man attempting to collapse a particularly stubborn umbrella aboard the Paddington omnibus and accidentally flinging it into another rider's face. The umbrella's defense in court? High winds and faulty mechanics. The man was fined 2 shillings and strongly encouraged to travel hatless in future. Then there were the train platforms, where umbrellas became both weapon and shield. Imagine a misty morning at Paddington Station. Dozens of people, anxious and buttoned up to their chins, jostling for position at the platform's edge. Umbrellas opened and closed like startled mechanical birds. You had to be careful. One overzealous pop, and you might take out a monocle, or worse, a newspaper. Train conductors were often umbrella gatekeepers. A popular bit of wisdom said that, to irritate a railway man, arrive with a dripping umbrella and a ticket to first class. This was largely because first-class compartments were considered too genteel for unmanaged wetness. Some conductors even carried cloths specifically to wipe umbrella handles, though whether this was courtesy or passive aggression is still debated by scholars. Inside the train cars, etiquette shifted depending on class. First-class travelers were expected to carry high-quality umbrellas, often with silver tips or mahogany handles, that matched their boots and demeanor. Leaving an umbrella on the seat? Scandalous. Leaning it against another passenger's leg? Grounds for icy silence. In third class, things were more forgiving. People huddled together, umbrellas jammed into corners, like unwanted relatives at a family reunion. Here the real challenge wasn't etiquette, it was retrieval. Since umbrellas were black, common, and often unmarked, mix-ups happened constantly. Some train stations even kept a lost umbrella ledger, where you could describe your missing parasol in painful detail. Imagine the awkwardness. Mine was about this long, wooden handle, smelled faintly of lavender liniment. Sir, that describes 12 umbrellas. Perhaps a distinguishing feature? It squeaks when opened. Ah, umbrella number 37, reunited once more. And let's not forget the London Underground, which opened in 1863. While the early trains were steam-powered, claustrophobic, and generally smelled like a boiled carpet, Victorians nonetheless used them. And umbrellas were not welcome. Why? Because they created bottlenecks at staircases and doors. One gentleman complained in a letter to the Times that he had been speared most grievously in the ankle by a brolly, and the perpetrator offered no apology, only a whiff of gin. As a result, some stations began experimenting with umbrella stands and hooks at entrances. The idea was simple: hang your umbrella, ride in peace. The reality? Theft. By 1878, the King's Cross station had lost more umbrellas than tickets. Eventually, the experiment was quietly abandoned, and Victorians simply learned to carry their umbrellas like unstable packages, close to the body, one eye always watching for potential jabs. But public transport etiquette didn't end at logistics. It extended into class dynamics. If you entered a cabriolet or hackney carriage with a particularly bedraggled umbrella, you risked being mistaken for lower class. This led to a peculiar social phenomenon: umbrella upgrading. People would borrow or rent high-end umbrellas for special outings, much like modern clutch purses or vintage watches. One enterprising shop even offered an umbrella valet service. For a small fee, you could arrive at your destination with a sleek, perfectly dry umbrella, only to hand it off discreetly and receive your original sopping specimen in return at the evening's close. Quite the trade-off if you didn't mind the moral ambiguity. Of course, children had no such concerns. Their umbrellas, often colorful and impractically small, were more toy than tool. Victorian illustrations show pint-sized umbrellas festooned with animal heads, musical instruments, or even miniature clocks. Unsurprisingly, none of these were welcome on the omnibus. One child and his time-telling umbrella caused a delay of 17 minutes, lamented a driver in his journal. So here you are, umbrella folded beneath one arm, pressed into a too-small carriage between a dozing vicar and a woman carrying a basket of pickled eggs. The rain may have stopped, but the tension hasn't. Every jostle of the road makes your umbrella shift, threatening to poke or drip or betray your upbringing entirely. But you've trained for this. You know the codes. You give a polite smile, adjust your grip, and angle the umbrella ever so slightly, just enough to suggest you belong here. Because in Victorian transport, as in all things, the umbrella was never just an accessory, it was a test. You step off the omnibus with a slight cramp in your left hand, the cost of maintaining a courteous umbrella angle for the duration of the ride, and your reward? The bustling, puddle-riddled world of the Victorian street. But today your focus shifts from strangers to someone far closer to home, your romantic prospects. Yes, welcome to the bizarre and highly choreographed theater of courtship via umbrella. In a world where direct eye contact could constitute an impropriety and holding hands might require a chaperone, the umbrella became an unlikely ally in the love lives of the Victorian middle and upper classes. Like a handheld semaphore of the soul, it offered 1,000 ways to hint, imply, and gently flirt, all without uttering a single scandalous word. Let's paint the scene. You and a prospective suitor take a stroll through Hyde Park. The weather is predictably damp but manageable, and you, clever thing, have brought your most dashing umbrella. It's black silk, perhaps, or adorned with a discreet ivory handle that catches the low light like a polished pebble. You walk slowly, spacing yourselves precisely 18 inches apart. Any closer, and you risk igniting gossip. Now the game begins. If you tilt the umbrella toward your companion, just slightly, it suggests affection. If you angle it away, even by a few degrees, it can imply detachment, disapproval, or perhaps that you're still thinking about that incident with the marmalade at breakfast. One Victorian etiquette manual helpfully declared, "The tilt of the umbrella, like the heart, must be read with caution." Historians still argue whether these subtle gestures were widely understood or simply romantic folklore propagated by those desperate to wring meaning from awkward silences. But many first-hand accounts suggest there was indeed a coded umbrella language among courting couples, one only slightly less complicated than semaphore or the Victorian flower code. Here are just a few rumored meanings. Umbrella tilted forward. You have my attention. Umbrella tilted backward. I feel you are encroaching. Shared umbrella, hands not touching. I acknowledge your presence and weather preparedness. Shared umbrella, fingers brush, gasp, scandalous intimacy. Closing the umbrella while standing near. I wish to linger. And if someone offered to carry your umbrella for you, especially in public, that was the 19th century equivalent of a first kiss. Unless, of course, they did so improperly. Then it was just humiliating. Let's not forget the complications of umbrella height disparity. If one person was significantly taller, the shared canopy could lead to all manner of neck craning and umbrella jostling. One particularly poetic young man in 1883 wrote to a friend that, "Miss Eugenie walks so close and so short that my umbrella becomes a crooked cathedral over us both." Romantic? Certainly. Practical? Not in the least. Of course, not every umbrella-fueled interaction was dreamy and decorous. Sometimes a poorly timed gust of wind would invert a parasol mid-promenade, exposing the ribs like some horrid mechanical skeleton. Other times, rain would fall so hard that conversation became a soggy pantomime of hand gestures and shouted pleasantries. In such cases, etiquette often collapsed into a chaotic scramble for the nearest portico, where lovers stood awkwardly dripping, their romantic tension slowly diluted by the downpour. Still, the umbrella remained a romantic staple in Victorian illustration and literature. Artists frequently depicted couples strolling through rain-slicked streets, umbrellas aloft, the world around them a blur of gray and mist. And always the umbrella hovered between them, not just shielding from weather, but creating an intimate little world all their own. One popular serialized novel of the 1870s included an entire chapter on the umbrella stroll, in which the heroine, Arabella, accepts a shared walk under a suitor's umbrella, only to discover, mid-ramble, that the umbrella bears another woman's monogram on the silk. The drama, the betrayal, the swift closing of said umbrella, and equally swift turning of heels. Truly, never trust a man whose broly tells more secrets than his lips. Let's not overlook the comedic potential here. Victorian satirical magazines loved poking fun at umbrella courtship. One cartoon from Punch depicted a couple crushed beneath an umbrella so large it resembled a circus tent, with the caption, "Harold, darling, I think your affections are a bit overextended." And then there was the issue of umbrellas as spontaneous chaperones. If a chaperone was unavailable for a walk, it was said that a sufficiently large umbrella could serve as a portable witness. Though legally unsound, it comforted many anxious parents. Perhaps most delightfully bizarre of all was the brief fad of umbrella promenades, planned strolls designed specifically for showing off one's coordination and umbrella etiquette. These promenades were less about weather and more about display. Think of it like an 1860s runway show, except everyone's wearing button boots and trying not to slip on horse manure. If your umbrella matched your gloves and your gait was considered weather-conscious but elegant, you were applauded silently. Applause being, of course, far too vulgar for Kensington Gardens. If you dripped on someone's spats, you were shunned. Courtship, already complicated by layers of protocol and fabric, found in the umbrella a perfect symbol: functional, fraught, and folding. It could shield you from judgment or turn on you at the worst possible moment. It could mean connection or a polite boundary. And like love itself, it could be entirely misinterpreted. So as you walk down the rain-dappled avenue, your companion close, the umbrella above you casting a gentle hush over the world. You understand. This isn't just a stroll, it's choreography, it's subtext, it's umbrella flirtation. You glance at your companion, a tilt forward, a pause. They tilt back. The rain continues, and neither of you says a word. The morning after your umbrella-fueled promenade, you might find yourself facing a different kind of etiquette challenge altogether: the art of umbrella storage and care. Victorian Londoners didn't simply toss their brollies into the nearest corner or leave them damp by the fire. Oh no, umbrella maintenance was a subtle but serious business, more complicated perhaps than choosing the right hat for a foggy day. You might imagine a grand household, its entryway a palace of polished brass hooks, each designated for a particular umbrella. Some homes had special stands, tall and narrow, lined with sand or sawdust, meant to drain wayward water drops and preserve the precious silk or oilcloth canopy. Leaving an umbrella wet was considered not just careless, but downright rude, both to the umbrella and to other household members who might slip on puddles or wrestle with soggy handles. But it wasn't just about neatness. An umbrella's condition spoke volumes about its owner's social standing and character. A battered, misshapen umbrella whispered tales of neglect or thriftiness, or worse, a chaotic life. A pristine, well-oiled shaft signaled discipline, care, and perhaps a hint of vanity. There was even an industry of umbrella cleaners and repairers, often tucked away in side streets, ready to re-oil fabric, replace ribs, or polish handles to a mirror shine. The best would carefully remove rust from metal parts, smooth splintered wood, and patch tiny tears. These craftsmen knew that an umbrella wasn't merely a tool against weather, but a daily companion, a status symbol, and, occasionally, a weapon in the social arena. A quirky twist: some umbrella repair shops doubled as informal gossip hubs. You could drop off your brolly and overhear the latest scandal about Lord Somebody's errant umbrella etiquette, or the new fashion for painted canopies featuring exotic birds. Historians still argue whether this was a deliberate social strategy or just the natural byproduct of a weatherproofed weight. Speaking of painted canopies, not every umbrella was a plain black affair. By the late Victorian era, some umbrellas became miniature art pieces, hand-painted scenes of country gardens, popular plays, or even caricatures of political figures. If your umbrella showed Queen Victoria riding a unicorn, yes, that really happened. You were either a brave soul or simply fond of causing a polite stir. These painted umbrellas, however, demanded even more delicate care, lest rain wash away the intricate brushstrokes or smudge the ink. And here's a rather delightful oddity. In some London neighborhoods, umbrella thieves became a low-level nuisance. A prankster might sneak off with a neighbor's umbrella, only to return it a day later with a cheeky note, or sometimes not at all. This gave rise to the umbrella club joke. Gentlemen exchanging umbrellas like trading cards, making sure none stayed in one place too long. Whether this was a widespread phenomenon or simply Victorian humorists having a laugh is still debated. In the grander scale, umbrella care tied into Victorian ideas about personal responsibility and respectability. You cared for your belongings because you cared about yourself, and by extension, society. An umbrella left dripping on the floor, or worse, propped open indoors, was a mark of sloppiness and social misstep. Yet for all the care, umbrellas had their limits. Wooden handles could warp, metal ribs rusted despite all precautions, and fabric grew brittle under London's notoriously unpredictable weather. The well-to-do replaced theirs frequently. The less fortunate made do, mending, patching, and coaxing old umbrellas back to life with loving patience. A final, slightly absurd note. Some umbrella owners believed that their umbrella had a personality and sometimes spoke to it. Victorian journals occasionally mention folks gently reprimanding their umbrellas for failing them in a sudden downpour or celebrating when a trusty brawly lasted a particularly rough season. Whether this was an early form of emotional attachment or just a bit of eccentricity, historians still debate. So next time you casually hang your umbrella by the door, imagine a world where that small act reflected not only practicality, but a whole social code, a relationship of respect between person and object. An umbrella wasn't just protection, it was a statement, a companion, a carefully tended friend. And as you pat the dry fabric and adjust the curved handle, you might smile. Because in that moment, you understand the secret Victorian truth. Even an umbrella deserves a little love. Your umbrella, now properly stored and respectfully dried, enters a new phase in its life, the social season. Yes, dear listener, Victorian umbrellas didn't merely fend off rain, they accompanied you to the theater, to tea, to garden parties, and to those unavoidably awkward dinners with distant cousins who still called gaslight a modern nuisance. You step out with your trusty brolly tucked under your arm, not because the sky looks moody, though it usually does, but because going without it would be like forgetting your gloves or your dignity. During the social season, particularly from April through July in London, umbrellas transformed from tools into accessories. And like all accessories in Victorian society, they came with invisible rules. You don't twirl your umbrella on the street. You don't rest it across your knees during carriage rides unless invited. And you most certainly don't open it at an outdoor luncheon unless you've been personally cursed by a vengeful duchess. Here's a charming wrinkle. At afternoon teas in Kensington, umbrellas were sometimes ranked. A gentleman might place his umbrella in a hall stand, only to return and discover that it had been politely demoted, moved aside to make space for a rival's newer, sleeker model. This passive-aggressive umbrella rearranging became so common that in 1884, one hostess reportedly placed numbered hooks and assigned guests an umbrella rank based on social standing and fabric finish. Historians still argue whether this was satire or sincere hierarchy enforcement. Frankly, in Victorian England, it could be either. But umbrellas weren't just accessories for the fashion-conscious. They were conversation starters. A painted canopy featuring a Shakespearean quote might invite a literary nod from a stranger. A carved ivory handle in the shape of a greyhound could spark a discussion about dog breeding, country estates, or the regrettable behavior of foxes. Some men carried umbrella handles embedded with compass dials or tiny thermometers. A few truly over-the-top designs even had built-in timepieces. And if you think that's excessive, consider the umbrella flask, a concealed compartment for a discreet nip of brandy during outdoor events. Was this a widespread practice or the stuff of eccentric myth? Historians still argue, though one suspects the flask saw heavier use at cricket matches than church outings. Let's not forget the umbrella flirtation code. Yes, it existed. Much like the infamous language of fans, some Victorians claimed that certain umbrella movements could signal romantic intentions. A closed umbrella held in the left hand. I'm available. A quick twirl to the right. I'm interested. A snap open while standing. Back off, I'm already engaged, or possibly afraid of pigeons. While most likely invented by the era's cheekier columnists, This playful lore captured the public imagination. Whether anyone actually decoded a marriage proposal from a well-timed umbrella tilt remains uncertain. And umbrellas could be theatrical props too. Picture a promenade at Hyde Park, where ladies in lavender gowns stroll under parasols and gentlemen in top hats pretend not to notice their umbrellas aren't really necessary. Some lean them just so against park benches, a display of casual elegance. Others use them to point at ducks in a way that said, "I read Byron and also feed birds." One anecdote tells of a barrister who gave weekly umbrella lectures to his children. Each umbrella had a name, a personality, and a dramatic backstory. Sir Charles had faced a windstorm in Edinburgh. Miss Plum had witnessed a secret garden proposal. Whether this tale is apocryphal or merely whimsical exaggeration, it reminds us of the role umbrellas played beyond mere weather management. And let's not forget the theatrical drama of umbrella sharing. Imagine being offered shelter under someone else's brolly, a moment of intimacy and trust. There were even etiquette guides suggesting how close you should stand beneath the same umbrella. Too far apart and you're soaked. Too close and it's practically a proposal. At the end of your long day of society events, your umbrella now carries the faint scent of cigar smoke, crushed violets, and pavement dust. It's had an adventure, seen people, and perhaps offended a valley or two by dripping on a freshly waxed floor. As you close the door behind you and gently rest it in the stand, you wonder how this humble item, wood, silk, and a bit of brass, came to hold so much sway over fashion, flirtation, and fate. And you think, not bad for something that started as a sunshade. The trouble with Victorian umbrellas, aside from their uncanny ability to cause offense at 6 paces, was that they often went missing. Not stolen, necessarily, though that happened too, especially with the finer silk ones with bone handles. No, more often they simply disappeared into cloakrooms, into theaters, into the hands of forgetful footmen or morally flexible cousins. You, dear listener, know this pain. You've just left the Royal Albert Hall after a concert, something stirring by Elgar, or perhaps an overly enthusiastic brass ensemble. And as you exit into the drizzle, your hand reaches for your umbrella and finds nothing. Gone. Umbrella theft, or parapluie pilfering, as one fussy newspaper dubbed it in 1889, became such a frequent grievance that some gentlemen had brass plaques riveted into the handles. Property of Mr. Horace T. Winchcombe, return if found. Not that it helped. The thief would simply unscrew the handle, replace it with a less accusatory one, and walk away dry. Some people turned to personalization, monograms, tassels, even the occasional miniature portrait lacquered into the knob. One eccentric Cambridge don allegedly attached a small taxidermied sparrow to his umbrella to discourage would-be thieves. Historians still argue whether this was meant seriously or as a comment on academic funding cuts. Umbrella rental schemes emerged in certain city clubs and railway stations. For a small deposit, you could borrow a brolly and return it once your journey concluded. Naturally, this gave rise to mismatched returns, with someone bringing back a frayed gingham number instead of the crisp black silk model they had originally been issued. Debates about umbrella fidelity erupted. At least one gentleman was formally expelled from his club for chronic return violations, though that might also have involved a disagreement over the oyster menu. Meanwhile, etiquette books quietly panicked. If umbrellas could vanish, be swapped, or mistakenly taken, then the entire architecture of umbrella respectability teetered on the brink. One manual gravely warned, "A man is judged by his umbrella as by his boots. To carry another's is a deception. To do so knowingly is a theft of both item and image." As a result, there was a brief period in the 1870s where umbrella certificates were issued by London department stores. These were elaborate receipts with color engravings and serial numbers, some even sealed with wax, to prove rightful ownership. Yes, the Victorians turned umbrellas into passport-level identification. The entire system collapsed predictably under the weight of rain-soaked bureaucracy. Now imagine the sheer logistics of umbrella ownership in a Victorian household. You didn't just own an umbrella, you had a wardrobe of them. The morning umbrella, all black, no trim. The afternoon walking umbrella, plum silk, subtly tasseled. The formal dinner umbrella, small, collapsible, never opened inside, heaven forbid. Each had to be accounted for, dried, inspected, rotated seasonally. It was practically a military operation, and heaven help you if you mixed up your umbrellas when leaving a social call. Taking home the wrong one, even by accident, was more than a faux pas. It was seen as a sort of character flaw. One etiquette columnist went so far as to say, "A man who confuses umbrellas cannot be trusted in his accounts." This paranoia birthed what some historians call umbrella anxiety, a low-level social dread that one's umbrella might be missing, mismatched, or incorrectly deployed. And in a world where impressions were everything, this anxiety wasn't unfounded. There are diary entries, real, not fictional, where Victorian clerks express profound remorse over leaving their umbrella on an omnibus. One wrote, "I am undone, both damp and disgraced." Of course, lost umbrellas also sparked comedy. Music halls put on skits featuring forgetful old men chasing the wrong umbrella across London. Newspapers printed mock personal ads. "To the lady of the blue parasol taken in error from the Strand, please know I am not a cad." It was one of those strangely universal experiences, the small heartbreak of a misplaced possession dressed up in the societal drama. One obscure side note, in certain legal circles, especially among magistrates, umbrella ownership was used as a metaphor for personal honor. A barrister might argue, "My client is no more likely to falsify these accounts than he is to abscond with another's umbrella." And oddly, that worked. It was a shared cultural understanding, like modern jokes about Wi-Fi passwords or who really finishes a novel they started on vacation. So here you are, back home again, umbrella missing, mind spinning. Maybe it'll turn up. Maybe it was a noble sacrifice to the rain gods. Maybe it now lives a new life with someone else. Someone who will never know the name you whispered to it during long, damp walks. And if not, well, there's always tomorrow. And the umbrella shop 3 blocks down. Let's say, in a moment of ambition, or perhaps damp desperation, you decide to purchase a new umbrella. But not just any umbrella. You're after a proper Victorian one, a statement piece. The kind that elicits subtle nods from gentlemen and fleeting glances from the respectable ladies of the promenade. So you make your way to one of the grand London department stores, Marshall and Snellgrove, or perhaps Swan and Edgar, where umbrellas are displayed like swords in an aristocratic armory. The scent is part beeswax polish, part wet wool, part ambition. A salesman approaches, trim, mustachioed, deeply judgmental. You want something dignified, you say, practical but with presence. He nods solemnly and gestures toward the mahogany-handled, silk-canopied, brass-ferruled collection, the Rolls-Royces of the umbrella world. These aren't just for weather, they're for position. You might as well be asking for a handshake with Queen Victoria. And yes, you'll want to consider handle shape. The standard crook, yes, but also the straight cane, the parrot beak, the eagle talon, for those with a flair for the dramatic. Then there's the ever-popular wangi, a bamboo-like wood so beloved by the dapper set that Winston Churchill kept one into the 20th century. Historians still argue whether Churchill's attachment to his umbrella was political symbolism or simply a defense against the damp. Materials, too, are critical. Cheaper umbrellas of the day used cotton or linen stretched over thin wires. But for those of means, black silk was the fabric of choice. Rain-slicked and nearly shimmering, it whispered of drawing rooms and opera boxes. You'd think it impractical, but the Victorians didn't let practicality get in the way of aesthetic drama. These were people who built decorative chimneys. Oh, and let's not forget umbrella tips, or ferrules. These came in horn, brass, ivory, ethically ambiguous even then, and occasionally vulcanized rubber for the cautious. An umbrella without a decent ferrule was like a top hat with a dent, passable in emergencies, but certainly not ideal. Now here's where it gets wonderfully absurd. Umbrellas with hidden compartments. Some high-end models came with little snuff holders built into the handle. Others concealed retractable blades. Yes, umbrella daggers. Though these were mostly novelty pieces or accessories for melodramatic uncles who thought London fog was a harbinger of fencing duels. One patent from 1872 describes a prototype umbrella that doubled as a flute. Historians still argue whether this was ever actually played in public or just an early form of musical multitasking. Custom orders were, of course, the height of umbrella luxury. Some aristocrats matched their umbrella trims to the livery of their footmen. Others had family crests etched into the handles in mother of pearl. One duchess commissioned a set of umbrellas for each season, each lined with a different floral pattern and scented with matching perfumes. Her footman reportedly suffered seasonal confusion and once arrived at a funeral carrying the peony-scented spring model. For the upwardly mobile, the umbrella was an entry ticket. No longer just a tool, it was part of your uniform, your social armor. Umbrella clubs even emerged. Yes, actual societies where gentlemen met to discuss the manufacture, etiquette, and proper carrying angles of umbrellas. Their minutes still survive. They are not exciting. One entire meeting appears to debate whether a gentleman may lend his umbrella to a lady twice in one day without damaging her virtue or his own reputation. There were umbrella fashion trends, too. For a few years, flat-top canopies became popular, offering a modern silhouette, though also an increased chance of pooling rainwater. In the 1890s, a brief flirtation with color emerged: deep green, navy, maroon, until black reasserted its moral authority. Then came the collapsible umbrella, a revolutionary invention that threatened to undo the entire umbrella as identity ecosystem. Patented several times with varying success, the collapsible design appealed to those tired of cloakroom entanglements. But society viewed them with suspicion. How could a man collapse part of his public self and still expect to be taken seriously? A Times editorial from 1895 declared, "If man is to shrink his umbrella, what next? His honor?" You test out a few models in the store, delicately unfurling them, watching how they open with a satisfying snap or an aristocratic sigh. You twirl one gently. It has weight, gravitas. This could be the one. And just as you're about to commit, the salesman leans in and whispers, "We do have one more," behind the counter. He retrieves it from a velvet-lined cabinet. The umbrella is dark, impossibly sleek, the handle carved from rare ebony, the canopy stitched from silk spun in lion. It costs more than your entire wardrobe. But for one glorious moment, you imagine yourself beneath it, striding confidently through Hyde Park, unbothered by clouds or commentary. You hand over the coin, accept the umbrella, and step out into the fog, unsure if it's raining or if the air is just being dramatic. Of course, now that you've got this glorious umbrella in hand, you must face the next and possibly most perilous gauntlet of Victorian society: storage and display. Yes, even when not in use, your umbrella must adhere to an elaborate code of placement that's just as unforgiving as the outdoor rules. Let's say you arrive at a respectable friend's house for a mid-morning visit. There is no umbrella stand visible in the front hall, which is your first test. You must not, under any circumstance, drip your umbrella onto the marble tiles. Not unless you want the maid to quietly hate you for the rest of your natural life. Instead, you give the thing a gentle shake outdoors. 3 shakes, no more, no less. Too many implies drama. And then hand it off, handle first, to the footman, who is trained to receive it as though it were a royal infant. In lower middle-class homes where footmen are in short supply, an umbrella stand does the job. But even here, not just any stand will do. Wrought iron with curling leaves, or perhaps a carved walnut number with discreet drip trays. You slide your umbrella in tip first, canopy up, ensuring the silk doesn't fold awkwardly or catch against another guest's handle. Victorian umbrella stands, in short, are like high-stakes game boards. One wrong placement, and you're cast as a social novice for the rest of the luncheon. Once inside, etiquette dictates that you don't speak of the umbrella again. It's like a noble steed you've tied outside, powerful, dignified, and deeply out of place in the drawing room. That said, some people couldn't resist showing off. Certain hostesses developed a habit of casual umbrella parading, inviting guests to leave theirs open slightly in the hallway so others could appreciate the quality of the stitching or the boldness of the silk weave. It was the Victorian version of parking your new carriage at an angle. Meanwhile, men in public houses had their own solutions. Lacking stands, they'd often rest umbrellas along the footrail or even hang them from hooks behind the bar. The result? Chaos. Mixed up handles, mistaken ownership, and a whole genre of umbrella brawls that found their way into local police blotters. Historians still argue whether a scuffle in 1871 at the King's Arms in Southwark was started over a swapped umbrella or a particularly aggressive pickled egg. In workplaces, the umbrella dance continued. Clerks had to navigate narrow office vestibules, carefully leaning their umbrellas in designated alcoves, always conscious of rank. Senior umbrellas took the prime dry positions, and woe betide the intern who placed their soaked cotton model next to the managing director's horn-handled masterpiece. That sort of umbrella collision could delay promotions by years. And then at home, the umbrella finally rested, but not unceremoniously. Wealthy Victorians stored their umbrellas in dedicated umbrella cabinets, often built into hall trees. These weren't just functional, they were wood-paneled shrines to dryness, complete with custom slots, engraved monograms, and little brushes for removing city grime. For the eccentric few, there were even mechanical storage solutions. One 1883 patent describes a device that gently spins your umbrella as it dries, like some odd weather-themed ballet. Historians still argue whether these devices were ever practical or simply a case of over-engineered umbrella guilt. And here's a lovely little fringe tidbit, a short-lived trend in umbrella charms. Much like watch fobs, these were small decorative trinkets, tiny silver animals or brass initials, attached discreetly near the ferrule. They made umbrellas easier to identify in crowded stands and served as a subtle flex of taste. One particularly fashionable bishop was known to carry an umbrella with a small silver snail affixed to the end, a nod presumably to divine patience. Children, meanwhile, were often given practice umbrellas, lightweight, oilcloth models designed to teach them the sacred ways of carriage and collapse. These umbrellas came with cautionary rhymes printed inside the canopy. One went, "Point not to sky nor jab at a friend, for an open umbrella may signal the end." Charming, also mildly terrifying. And of course, there was the ever-lurking umbrella theft epidemic. So prevalent was the issue that some gentlemen took to engraving their names on the handles or attaching small padlocks to umbrella stands. One popular pamphlet from the 1890s advised, "Better to brave the drizzle than to tempt the thief with your patent silk." You begin to realize owning an umbrella in Victorian England wasn't just about rain protection. It was about performing dryness with dignity, even when soaked to your ankles in London muck. Your umbrella was your reputation, folded tightly, stitched precisely, and guarded like a family secret. And as you reach your destination, be it a sooty office block or a cousin's tea salon, you pause before the door, take a breath, and perform one final flick of the wrist. Just enough to shake off the last drops, not so much as to seem flustered. You enter, umbrella aligned with your right leg, silk gleaming faintly like a raven's wing. In that moment, you understand. You have joined the quiet, glorious ranks of the well-equipped. The etiquette of umbrellas didn't stay confined to personal routines or household decor. No, in true Victorian fashion, the obsession eventually spilled into legislation, or at least proposals for it. By the late 1800s, cities like London were becoming choked with umbrellas, particularly on crowded walkways and rainy market days. And if you think today's pavement rage is bad, imagine hundreds of people navigating narrow cobbled streets with metal-spiked parasols, all bristling with impatience and damp frustration. There was even a brief campaign by one city alderman to restrict umbrella use on narrow alleys, claiming the devices were a menace to public eye safety. Historians still argue whether this was a serious safety concern or a polite way of targeting poorer citizens who carried wider, cheaper models that lacked the precision of the upper-class designs. Meanwhile, shopkeepers began posting signs, "No umbrellas inside," prompting clever manufacturers to invent folding umbrellas with shorter reach and gentle hinge closures. A kind of proto-compact model meant to collapse with less fanfare. But as with all things Victorian, these innovations came with snobbery. Some claimed the rapid fold designs were suitable only for those without proper coatmen, implying you should have a servant to carry your unfolded umbrella for you. All of which leads us to the final stage of umbrella etiquette, disposal. Victorian thrift meant very few things were casually thrown away, especially umbrellas. When a canopy tore or a rib bent beyond repair, it was not binned, it was repurposed. Cloth was reused for doll clothes or tea cozies, ribs turned into plant stakes, and handles, especially ornate ones, became walking stick heads, curtain pullers, or even shoehorns. A respectable house might contain remnants of 10 or more umbrellas, all reborn in secret corners. And yes, there were umbrella repair shops, bustling, vital places tucked into side alleys and behind general stores. Their signs read things like restitch, refashion, resurrect. And they had a smell somewhere between wood polish, mildew, and stubborn pride. You could bring in a broken umbrella, describe its family history, and leave with something sturdier, shinier, and infused with a sense of renewal. Still, not everyone was so patient. Some Victorians were prone to what we now might call umbrella rage. When one aristocrat's handle snapped in the middle of Piccadilly, witnesses claimed he hurled the entire apparatus into a coal cart and declared umbrellas an affront to divine weather. Whether this was recorded for dramatic effect or out of genuine disgust, historians still argue. But the image of a monocled gentleman hurling silken brass into soot remains oddly satisfying. Children, for their part, were told cautionary tales about bad umbrella ownership. One popular moral story involved a boy named Timothy who refused to dry his umbrella properly. The next day, the story goes, it sprouted mushrooms and was deemed unclean for Christ's church. Another tale involved a young girl whose umbrella was so poorly stitched it turned inside out and carried her over a hedge. These stories were told with the straightest possible faces, but you can sense the wink behind them. And finally, there's one last curious little fact to tuck into your satchel before we part: the ghost umbrellas. In some Victorian diaries, particularly from country villages, you'll find entries that mention the lonely umbrella, often left by a guest who never returned. It would sit in a hallway or corner, untouched, slowly gathering dust. Superstition held that moving it might bring the rain back, and so families left them like quiet tombstones for the weather's past mischief. Some households even gave them names: Aunt Penelope's umbrella, the one from Brighton, the opal-handled stranger, and there they stayed for years, silent, folded, and dignified, which in a way sums up the Victorian umbrella itself. It wasn't just a tool for dryness, it was a symbol of preparedness, of containment, of navigating chaos with a very straight spine. And yes, sometimes it made things more complicated than they needed to be, but in that complexity was a kind of charm, a comforting choreography of fabric, steel, and endlessly unwritten rules. So now, as the rain begins to fade in your imagination, and you picture yourself resting that umbrella gently by the door, perfectly dry, perfectly aligned, you feel a quiet kind of mastery. You've survived a downpour of manners and emerged dry and upright. Wind down begins. And now that we've folded the last crease, brushed off the droplets of history, and tucked our silk canopies into the corner, it's time to let the bustle fade. You've walked the foggy streets, mastered the sidewalk ballet, and even remembered to shake, not whip, your umbrella before entering the parlor. That's no small feat. Let your mind drift, just a little now, to a quieter place. Perhaps an old coat room lit with gaslight, filled with the scent of damp wool and lemon polish. There, among the walnut umbrella stands and ticking grandfather clocks, you feel time slow to a gentle shuffle. The voices are hushed. The air is still. You made it through Victorian umbrella etiquette with grace, or at least with minimal poking. And now there's nothing left to navigate. No footmen, no rules, no brass-tipped weapons of courtesy to worry about. Only soft rain tapping gently against a distant window. Only the calm of knowing that sometimes even the silliest rituals carried meaning and comfort, and just the right amount of fuss. So close your eyes. Let the old streets fade. Let the umbrellas rest. You've earned the stillness. Sweet dreams.